The unthinkable has occurred. The unbelievable has happened, or maybe it's believable if you're a longtime fan of the West Virginia Mountaineers, as WVU basketball, and I mean WVU men's basketball, obviously the women got in, but the men had their bubble popped. The men's basketball team is not going to be part of March Madness, or at least not the traditional March Madness. We'll get to maybe what they're going to do here in a moment on this live reaction edition here of West Virginia not making the men's NCAA tournament. They do make the women. Maybe we'll get to some women's talk here to be fair, but obviously the major story, the major reaction, the national reaction when you look at their resume and the fact that 111 brackets had them in. They were perfect on bracketology, and certainly the Joe Lenardis, Andy Katz's of the world, etc., had them in for months, including off of some losses, including on their roller coaster ride, and even after losing to Colorado in the first round of the Big 12 tournament. Not a good loss by any means. They've had some bad ones, but also some major wins and 19 overall wins from a tough conference. Normally would get you in. Six quad one wins apparently mean nothing to the committee, as West Virginia again got snubbed. Mike Asti, Cody Nespor, WVU Sports Now. And this is our live reaction edition here, Mountaineer Report, whatever you want to call it, as we are reacting as everybody else is. So, Cody, we have a lot to unpack here, and we wish we could have done this show hours ago when everyone was reacting, but we had a lot to write and a lot to put on the site, which is currently there at WVU Sports Now, and more will be coming, to say the very least. So, what was your initial first reaction to West Virginia actually having their bubble popped? We talked about them flirting with the bubble and maybe this being a small possibility, but neither one of us ever thought this really would happen. And then it does.
Yeah. Mike, I want to start, give credit to the women's team. They got a good seed. They got a good destination.
100%.
They deserve to be talked about. We're going to talk about the men much more tonight. No fault of the women. It's not fair to them that they're going to miss out on the coverage tonight because of this. And I just want to say that off the top, but my initial it's
I just want to quickly add to that. I think that the women and men should not have their selection show on the same day to avoid this scenario.
Yes.
That's exactly what I even said in our group chat. And I continue to say, and I thought was continuously weird. Obviously, the women have had a great run the last couple of years with Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, etc. And you could argue they have more stars in their sport. The men are always going to get ratings and interest, even if maybe they don't deserve it at times. But this is a perfect example. There's no reason why they had to do this today. Do your show tomorrow. Do the show on Monday. You would then get talked about. We would do a whole show on them, but they're getting overshadowed because of this. And it's not the only program for the women that's going to get overshadowed. There are other programs that are going to get overshadowed for their coverage as well, because the men, good or bad, getting in or not getting in is going to be the story. So that's the way to avoid this, and it should not be on the same day or night. But go on.
Yeah. And hopefully we could find a few minutes at the end of this to talk about the women.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable to me that the men didn't get in. I'm far from the only person to have that opinion. Right. It's unthinkable for them to be behind some of the teams that did get in. And let's, we're going to bring it up eventually. Let's talk about North Carolina.
Yeah.
It is unbelievable. I guess it is believable because the NCAA sucks. It is unbelievable to have North Carolina's athletic director as the chair of the selection committee, and for them to take the very last spot in the bracket over West Virginia and Indiana and a bunch of other teams that got snubbed. It is. I don't care. You are not a serious organization if you let that happen. And I'm not saying there's corruption, and I'm not saying this or that. The optics alone are such that you cannot let that happen. And you cannot have Bubba Cunningham go on TV 5 minutes later and give no answer. I mean, give no explanation. Oh, well, the net, the strength of schedule, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, man, give a reason. Tucker DeVries is injured, and we take player availability. And Tucker DeVries hasn't played since December 6th. He played 8 games this year. They played 3 times as many games without him. He cannot be why you left him out.
Yeah.
So either give us a reason or, Bubba, don't go on TV because it's a bad look. And guess what? Everybody thinks you look corrupt now. And I don't know if you are or not. I assume you are because I'm not stupid, right? Like, oh, he's not allowed to be in the room when they talk about North Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay, is he in the room when they talk about West Virginia? Is he in the room when they talk about Indiana? Is he in the room when they talk about Xavier? He's in the room. Like, we're not babies. Oh, well, he's not in when they talk about North Carolina, so he has nothing to do with it. Are we stupid? I mean, like, what? We have to pretend that's true? Come on. The NCAA,
he must think we are, honestly. And I even said to somebody, because they brought up that being the reason, they just made up a reason. They're going to say the Tucker DeVries thing because obviously they just want North Carolina in. I said this then to somebody who brought that up to me, and I stand by it now. Off of kind of what you're saying, they would have been better off giving two reasons. One, no reason. They literally, I swear to God, he would have been better off saying no comment than saying Tucker DeVries is the reason. And secondarily, you got to come up with another reason, because as you're saying, this is actually, and this is not going to get the national recognition in that regard because it's football versus men's basketball, and it's being the last team potentially in versus when you were a number 5 and barely got in and got missed out. But this is actually arguably worse than Florida State not making the playoff a couple years ago, because Florida State, yes, they had a legitimate argument, and yes, they're still probably in their feelings about it, but they did eventually expand the college football playoff. They would have got in if it happened to be part of the 12-team playoff, even under that scenario. It was unfortunate it happened that year, and it did suck for them. But they lost a player who, a quarterback, and it was a big deal. But if you look at the amount of time that these two teams were without that guy, as you said, Tucker DeVries has not played since December. West Virginia's resume was 80% without Tucker DeVries. It was not an example of you have a resume with a guy like Florida State, and then you lose him at the end of the year when the resume is pretty much complete, and then the committee says, well, you're not going to be entertaining because you have no chance, so now you're not a part of it. That's where this is different. This would be like if Florida State lost the QB in week 2. That would be the only comparison here, because Tucker's been out 90% of the season. He's only played 8 games. And this is literally what I do think, and I know it's a formality. You give the committee chair time to give his answer, and then you go on to the next topic. I know how the studio shows work. But honestly, I think this is a rare scenario, and I do think certain people in the national media, like saying Ernie Johnson, would have done this. You need to call an audible and have a follow-up and say, what you're basically telling us is if Tucker DeVries being out is your reason, dead serious, West Virginia played an exhibition season from the middle of December on. You're literally, they literally might as well not have played. There was no point of playing. There was no point of playing, because after Tucker DeVries got hurt, they had big wins. They beat Kansas in Lawrence without Tucker DeVries. And yes, they also lost to Colorado too, but they had big wins. They had 3 top 10 wins this year, and 2 of them were without Tucker DeVries. Like, they've had 6 quad 1 wins, 2-1 for North Carolina, with most of them without Tucker DeVries. There was no point of playing basketball if that is the reason. It almost sounds like they made up their mind in December, because we didn't get the official announcement until later, but everyone kind of knew he wasn't going to play. And even to be fair, okay, they made up their mind in February when the announcement was made that Tucker was out for the year. That's insane. That literally tells the team there was no point in playing the rest of the year. So that reasoning is the worst of all here. And there's just no debate of this. This is the perfect example of you. This is how you, Cody, and I'll throw it back to you then. This is how you know it's a snub. Because even the people that want to say it's West Virginia versus the world and it's WVU getting snubbed, you have national media members who normally do not discuss West Virginia sports, good or bad, who are some who do not even speak on college basketball that often, and yet are taking it upon themselves at 11 p.m. on a Sunday when they are not working. They do not have a show. They are not on TV, to go on social media and to argue the insanity of West Virginia not being in with this resume. Okay, these are people that are not getting paid for these comments, and yet they're doing so, at least not directly. That tells you, like when Mad Dog Russo is having a Mad Dog rant about WVU, I don't think he's ever had one about WVU in his whole 40-year career. He decided to have his first about this NCAA tournament. That tells you that there is something that they are looking at. I'm sure there are plenty of them that would even understand the TV ratings and understand Blue Bloods that are probably looking at it before they release their tweet saying, well, our network would rather us go North Carolina and defend this. How can we argue it and do mental gymnastics? And then they're looking at it saying, we F it. We can't. Holy shit. There's nothing to say here. So that is the other end of this. Again, the resumes are not close. The reason why everybody was so confident, the only thing that all of WVU media has really ever agreed on unanimously was they're still going to get in even if they have to go to Dayton, is because they had a better resume than everyone on the bubble. That's true. They had a better resume than when they got in the tournament in the final year of Bob Huggins. This year's team is a better resume than that year's team. Tough conference, 6 quad ones, 3 top 10, 4 ranked wins, and 19 overall wins. It wasn't even like they landed on 17 or 18. They got 19. It almost sounds like, Cody, that even if they would have beat Colorado, they still wouldn't have got in.
Yeah. So if we're going to seriously take that Tucker DeVries being out was a major factor in this, which I don't think anybody's buying that. I think everybody sees that as BS.
Right.
Then West Virginia's best course of action in hindsight would never to have been announced that he was out for the season. Do not announce he's having surgery. Never say it. Every time DeVries gets asked about it, say he's day-to-day. Right? Or say on February 4th, announce Tucker's having surgery. He could be back for the tournament. We don't know. I'm not a doctor. He might be back for the tournament, even if there's zero chance in the world he is. Because by saying Tucker's out, it's given the committee this excuse, which doesn't make any sense. They had 4 quad 1 wins without him, 2 top 10 wins without him.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. Tucker's injury is the reason they're left out. But it gives the committee this excuse. Apparently now, every coach in America is never going to declare players out. Guy snaps his leg in the conference tournament. He might be back. I don't know. He might. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah. Well, the committee's just going to start making assumptions, though. They're just going to start making assumptions and saying that they knew he wasn't going to play anyway. And now Dickie V is now speaking out in favor of the West Virginia Mountaineers. And yes, he's not exactly a WVU fan. Again, just add the list of names for national media members that are supporting West Virginia in this.
It's unbelievable. It's like last year when the women played Iowa and Kevin Durant was tweeting about it.
Yeah,
obviously something's going on. If everybody's, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. And obviously I'm biased because I'm so close to this. It's the biggest snub I can think of. Like the last 10 years since I've paid attention.
Yeah, I hate doing that because it is hard because every time you say that there's going to be a fan of Tennessee or some other random program somewhere that's going to be like, well, we had this many. They didn't do Ken Pum in the net at that point, but we had the same amount of top 25 wins, etc. It's hard to do that, of course, but this is because people also, and we'll get to this later on what their response is going to be in postseason play and all of that and what I've heard and what kind of is going to come out about that. But there are some WVU fans, and this is a calling to you because I've already seen comments on the site and even comments to me on social media saying this should be the rallying cry to go ahead and win. They aren't going to do the NIT, but go ahead and win the Crown Royal thing in Vegas and throw another banner up and show them that way. Number one, that shows them not at all. That does not do anything. You may do that and maybe you'll get some money, but because people are trying to compare this and saying that is what John Beilein's team did, and then that sent the program on a course, even without Beilein, to then have a great tenure. The next decade after after the 2007 snub was some of the most success in program history, and Beilein even had success, even though not West Virginia. So the snub happened. They won the NIT. They have a banner for it, even though it's not nearly as big as the 42 national title NIT banner. And then you have great success with WVU and even great success with Beilein. So that did not hurt them in any way. And people are trying to argue that if you just go ahead and do that, it'll be fine. And if you do the opposite and try to sue the NCAA, then you're just not going to get in future tournaments. Well, again, winning the Crown tournament, the crown of basketball or whatever it's called. No one cares.
College basketball crown.
Yeah, college basketball. I even wrote about it and I don't even remember. But college basketball crown, winning that, and you could have a banner and have a crown on it or something. Maybe just hang a whole crown up to the Coliseum, to the rafters. No one's going to care. This is not 1942 when you could argue that it's a bigger deal than the NCAA tournament. This is not even 2007 when it's a different media climate and social media wasn't even as much a thing and you didn't have all these other tournaments and it was just the NIT really. It's a different climate, number one. It's not going to show anybody anything. All it's going to do is give in to what the NCAA wants. I'm sure the NCAA is sitting there saying, yeah, go ahead and do your own thing. We don't want you in this clearly. We'd rather have North Carolina. Go ahead and do that, and that's fine. The other end of it is programs that I do think you're better than in terms of historically and even currently, Pitt for one, have made it very clear they're above these tournaments, that these tournaments are beneath them. So why are they not beneath you? And then the other end of that is there is no way they shouldn't have got in this tournament. The 2007 snub is not close to this. Not even close to this. You could argue it then. This is one of the most egregious snubs in NCAA tournament history, men or women. Easy, 100%. I don't know off the top of my head while we're doing the show if it is the number one in the entire history of the tournament. I don't know if I can go on that limb, but I could see someone arguing it. It is certainly the biggest snub for West Virginia athletics in terms of something they legitimately could win and that they didn't really F up despite the Colorado loss. They got snubbed here. So, yeah, I don't think playing in anything else does anything for you than a little bit of a paycheck, and maybe it's cool. I don't think the banner would mean anything. I don't think it would matter. It's a different media climate. I don't think anyone's going to care. I don't think the ratings will be there. I don't think the social media engagement is going to be there. I don't think WVU fans are going to give a damn about it if the program thinks they will. And I think it's what the NCAA wants. Go ahead and do your own thing and leave us the hell alone, and we want to do this tournament without you. I think you need to make a statement saying we're going to do nothing else. Our resume was worthy of the NCAA tournament. I don't care if the crown of basketball is not able to operate without us and we go against the rules because they're supposed to take the top two teams that were snubbed. We're not doing it. F it. That's what I would say. And Ren Baker went near that, but he's of course not going to go that far, and they're likely going to play in the crown from what I'm hearing. But that does nothing for me. That does nothing for me. That's nothing for me.
I'm going to disagree with you on one single point there, Mike. I think WVU fans would care because I think fans really, really liked this team, and for it to just be over right now, for them to be done, you'd
at least be done with Wednesday, small Tucker.
Right. To just be done and to not see this team again, I think would be heartbreaking for fans. So if they go to this crown thing and they play on whatever damn date it is, I think people would watch. I think people would care if they win the whole thing. I think fans would care a lot.
Is there pressure that you have to get win or bust like in 2007? What if you lose?
No, I think if they go out and they play that one game, I think people would just be happy to see them one more time and to kind of get closure on this team. Because right now, I mean, that's the biggest feeling I have, right? There's no closure on this because everybody assumed they'd go to the tournament. And so the Colorado loss wasn't devastating because you didn't think the season was over.
No. So, I mean, again, Lenardi and Katz put him on the bubble, but they had him in. Yeah. If you look at the bubble, they were still a 10 seed. They weren't even in F in Dayton. They were not in Dayton after that loss.
So I think, just getting one more game out of this team would do a lot for fans. I think it really would. I think, like I said, I think people would care. If they won the whole thing, I think people would be really, really, really happy with that. For this team to just be done and to disband now, I think, like I said, I think people would be heartbroken. I think people really got behind this team, got behind Javon Small, and I think it would just be a travesty if it's just over now. If Wednesday was the end and nobody knew it.
Well, using the word travesty, that's literally what Ren Baker said of not making the NCAA tournament is. He called it a travesty. That was literally in his statement on X. And yes, no, it 100% would suck not to see this team because that is another thing that the reaction to the Colorado loss was, oh, this is a bad loss, and maybe they'll have to go to Dayton and it's not good, and they shouldn't have lost this game. But it was not an overwhelming sky is falling because people did think they were still going to get in. And I also do think that if it was a scenario where they really thought they could go ahead and go to a Final Four, then people would have said, oh, that screws you in positioning. That's going to hurt you. But most people were getting to the point with this team because Tucker was out and they had wins, but they also been up and down this year and they had a depleted roster, all the things that apparently the North Carolina AD doesn't like and doesn't want to see any longer. And kind of the movie that could have been Conquering the Adversity, that people would have been able to agree that this was a successful season simply for getting in. And if you go to the NCAA tournament and you lose in the first round, or even if you lose in Dayton, I don't think even the most negative WVU fan, maybe they would have, but I don't even think them would have been able to say this is a bad, quote unquote, bad year, because it's year one of a coach, a transfer roster, Tucker being out. They were in a tough conference. They have the wins, etc. And, then you'll worry about the rest of the offseason later. But now you are starting to hear some of that. I'm already seeing some comments of, there already were some comments of, it's not so much that I want to have Huggins back as coach, but the committee did him favors. They're not doing us favors without Huggins. There are some people trying to bring up conspiracies that they don't want West Virginia there because of the way the Huggins thing ended. You're getting crazy thoughts. But Cody,
I had somebody
those
said,
comments were not said after the Colorado loss. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Nobody thought this would happen, and now you're getting the crazy conspiracies because they had their bubble popped.
Yeah, I saw someone said this is retribution because Raekwon Battle sued the NCAA.
I also saw that. Yeah,
come on with that.
Yeah, I mean, all of that's insane. But what because if the NCAA was going to have retribution on every program that ever sued them, they would have no tournament, because a lot of these programs that are in the NCAA tournament had sued them at some point or another in basketball or football, and even some that got in the playoff, even though it's a different thing. Like, they've been sanctioning things from programs that were against them years and years ago many times. So that's not, that's not their problem. But yeah, I mean, this, again, I don't think anybody thought this. And then when you get the reason, it becomes even more illegitimate. I mean, the reasoning is the worst of this all. Again, I do feel they would have been better with no comment. I mean, it would have been better. He would have been better texting the network and saying, I can't come on. I decline the appearance, because that would have been better than this, to come out and make the Tucker comment. And it's almost weird. Like, it almost seems like he made that comment. Obviously, it feels like there was, some shady business going on, but it almost feels like he made that comment thinking, there's nothing I can argue resume here. So if I say this, it's similar to Florida State. And I did get some defense nationally on Florida State because, they cared about TV ratings. So I'll try to sell this. It almost seems like he thought he was going to fool some people, but nobody is getting fooled off of this. And I get not wanting to be done watching this team. And maybe the fans will get behind thinking they'll flip their middle finger if they do win it. And I'm sure they put a banner up if they do win it. I just do not think it'll be the same as what 2007 was. I do not, because that was a younger team. That was Beeline kind of building up, taking over from the end of Catlett that was so bad. That was before Beeline became the Hall of Famer he became. That was before the Final Four. That was a different WVU basketball type of situation. At that point, winning an NIT was a big deal because there's long history, but it had been a while. They were years removed from the Sweet 16 at the end of the 90s, which was really the last time they had a big moment in March prior to that NIT title. And that was viewed as at the time, that was celebrated and viewed as a big deal. That was, and that was early in me becoming a student at WVU. So I'm well aware of what happened there. Definitely was involved in that. But to now flip it, it might be something that people want to watch the team, but I just do not think the sales pitch of I'd rather win a tournament than lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament, which now I'm hearing from some, works. Like, you want to get in the NCAA tournament, and they deserve to be there, and they didn't get in. They didn't hit their end goal. And when you look at Ren Baker's statement, it doesn't seem like an AD that would be happy winning a crown tournament. It sounds like he's pissed at not getting in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. Mike, I think it's telling. The committee in Bubba Cunningham, who's the chair, their reasoning for keeping WVU out, they've never mentioned resume. It's extremely telling to me.
You can't.
I mean, Bubba Cunningham went on CBS, and the guys on the CBS said, how do you pick UNC over West Virginia? And he did not resume. And look, he didn't do a 10-minute segment on it, but never mentioned resume, never mentioned UNC's resume. mentioned Tucker DeVries. And it's like, because there is no resume argument. And let's real quick. Somebody said, and I wish I had a better memory so I could give credit. Somebody said, well, hey, if you look at the last 10 games, West Virginia hasn't looked like a tournament team, and UNC's played pretty well. And I don't disagree with that. But let's talk about West Virginia's end of the season, which I have said previously it wasn't that bad. So they lose at TCU. That was a terrible loss, right? Up by double digits.
Mm-hmm.
Young TCU team, you let them come back and beat you. Bad loss. Since then, their only losses were to BYU, a 6 seed, overtime at Baylor, a 9 seed, Texas Tech, a 3 seed, and then you get the terrible loss to Colorado in the Big 12 tournament. So if you're telling me you can go, how many weeks is that? They lost to TCU on February 5th. If you can go 5 weeks, your only losses are to tournament teams, single-digit seed tournament teams, and you blow one game in the Big 12 tournament and you're out.
And Texas Tech was a really bad showing, but they were a top 10 team at the time.
And they ended up being a 3 seed.
Yeah, right.
3 seed. And then I'm sorry, with that resume, if you say that 5-week stretch to end the season, sorry, you didn't get in. It's unbelievable. And I don't think whatever defense comes out, hey, the selection committee just might be done talking about this.
They probably are.
They probably don't care.
No.
But what you're not going to hear,
they're going to get ratings anyway. Yeah, maybe more.
But you're not going to hear. There's not going to be any defense that mentions UNC's resume being better than West Virginia's, or hell, better than Indiana's, or Xavier's resume being better than West Virginia's, or San Diego State's resume being better, because none of them are, right? And
Indiana's another blue blood that got left out. I mean, Indiana is a blue blood as well.
That's what's so frustrating, because we're told, hey, the net matters. Quad 1 wins really, really matter. Beating ranked teams really matter. Apparently it doesn't. Man.
Well, that was the only thing I was going to give was I was going to ask, and kind of as a pushback to that, and this is the only devil's advocate I can think of, because again, resume to resume, this is also the issue too. Resume to resume. And I said this on a past show, and I stand by this. The difference of the NCAA tournament, because versus what the college football playoff is now doing, and why there's always going to be arguments and there's always going to be gripes. And Cody, I think we all would agree that it is physically impossible to have an NCAA tournament with this many teams in which no fan base will ever feel snubbed. You're going to make a mistake, even, which maybe you could argue was certainly this year. You're going to make a mistake, and in your hours-long meeting with all of these resumes you're going over, you may have a small oversight when you're getting to team 66 and 67, when you're picking who goes to Dayton. You may. And I will agree that when you're arguing resumes on who is going to be the 66th, 67th, etc., when you're getting into the teams that go to Dayton, when you're arguing a team like Robert Morris who gets in for winning a conference, when you're debating on whether or not they're a 14 seed or a 15 or a 16, that is a little bit, I don't want to call it irrelevant because it matters for those programs, but that's not something that the national media is going to scream about as much. Because yes, if you deserve a 14 and you end up as a 16, winning your conference as a mid-major, that is unfair. You should be mad, because that does matter whether you have a chance of winning a game or maybe not. But it's not to this level. But you're always going to have situations and people getting snubbed. I think Pitt actually got snubbed last year, to be fair. You're going to always have snubs. But the difference is, and why Pitt did not get in last year, Cody, if you recall, they gave actually a resume reason with Pitt. They didn't have a Tucker DeVries injury, but they gave a reason. And the argument against Pitt last year, because they kind of did the reverse, they're kind of doing a North Carolina thing a little bit. The argument with them was, unlike college football, college basketball takes into account the whole season. And Pitt, for years, has slept through the entire fall. They used to always lose to West Virginia. The only time they beat him was when Eiler was coaching and you had the Huggins scandal. But they would sleep through the fall. And then in the new year, this year they did the opposite, obviously, and blew their season. But in the new year, they would turn it on. And last year, if you recall, they sucked in the fall despite the West Virginia win. And then they turned it on and really looked good later on. They did that for a couple years, actually. And they still didn't get in. And the committee kept banging the drum saying, overall body of work and the full season matters. And you cannot just punt games and then turn it on late. And that Pitt fans were saying, we'd make a run now if we got in. No one wants to play us. I'm sorry. You had a rough road earlier on. The whole resume counts. But now the committee is literally saying what we as a people said last year does not now matter, is totally off the board, is totally hypocritical to those comments. Forget what we said. They probably think everyone doesn't remember. And we're not taking body of work into consideration. That is what the college football playoff does that sometimes is annoying, where they week 1 and week 2 do not seem to matter nearly as much as week 9 and 10. And overall body of work should matter because you're playing the whole season, or otherwise don't play it. You've got to count the whole season. In college basketball, they usually do. They didn't this year. They basically told West Virginia, again, once Tucker DeVries got hurt, if you buy that reasoning, which is what they're selling right now, once Tucker DeVries got hurt in early December, they were playing an exhibition season. The season didn't matter. The games didn't matter. Beating Kansas at Kansas did not matter. The win over Gonzaga did not matter. The win over Arizona did not matter, even with Tucker, even though then they did avenge it. The 6 quad 1 wins did not matter. There's no way to go resume to resume, but that is what they said, that they're no longer doing overall body of work. The only pushback, though, I'll get back to that. The only pushback I could give you when you're bringing up the net and the analytics, and this is what benefited the Mountaineers a few years ago, the end of Huggins, that maybe is the difference there because they both have 19-win seasons. That Huggins team did get in with Eric Stevenson. This one does not. The NET, the Ken Palm, the metrics were better most of that year for WVU with Huggins. They were inside the top 40 most of the season, whereas I believe Ken Palm, they finished outside the top 50, and net, they were higher as well in the late 40s, even in the 50s at times, and early 40s at best. That season was better metrics. So the only pushback is, do you believe if West Virginia had better metrics and maybe they didn't, do you believe like if they had better metrics, they then would have got in? Do you think that was a factor at all? That's the only difference, is their metrics were better a couple years ago with a very similar resume otherwise that got in, and this year's team did not.
Yeah. I just don't know how you, like, if we go down that avenue, it's like, how good do they have to be? Right? Like, North Carolina's
usually top 40, 45.
12. I mean, 1 in 12 in quad 1 games. The
North Carolina thing is a problem.
It's right. Like Xavier's 1 in 9. Let's not let Xavier off the hook. Like, like you're right. So I just don't. How much better would WVU have to be to beat either of those teams? And San Diego State too. Like they get a little bit of a pass, but they're not a great team. They're not a. They have to be in kind of team. Oklahoma too. We don't. The 14th SEC team doesn't need to be in the tournament. I don't care how good that conference is supposed to be. I mean, let's be serious. The 14 SEC teams deserve to be in. Get real.
Do you think they'd be in if they were still a Big 12 team? Probably not.
No.
Right.
No, they wouldn't be. North Carolina wouldn't be in if their name wasn't North Carolina. If their name was North Carolina State, they would not be in this tournament.
100%. If that was Pitt or Virginia Tech, it's only because they're a blue blood. It's not even the ACC thing. It's because they're a blue blood North Carolina, 100%.
Oklahoma absolutely would not be in if they were a Big 12 team. Oklahoma is, as a 9 seed, is unbelievable. It's unconscionable. They get a 9 seed. The SEC, this unbelievable. What happened to that conference this year, and I don't care what the computers say, man. No conference is that good. No conference is so good that 14 teams need to go to the tournament. It's not possible.
I hear you, although the argument, what was the argument 2-3 years ago with the Big 12? They deserved 12, 14 teams. That was the argument then. And they didn't get that many, but that was that argument at that time.
And I remember, whatever year you're talking about, the Big 12 got washed in the first round because they're not that good. No conference is that. I mean, unless we're talking about the SEC is the best conference that's ever been assembled to play college basketball, which it's not.
Yeah, 2010 Big East maybe.
I guarantee you, the SEC is going to get washed in the first 2 rounds. They're in the first round. I guarantee you a bunch of SEC.
Well, Cody, you're also bound to have somebody go far when you have 14 damn teams in, because
Auburn's awesome. Alabama is awesome.
But to connect the dots to what you're talking about,
Yeah.
so that I believe that was the year that West Virginia got in the end of Huggins, because that was kind of the end of even the Big 12 dominance, where it was kind of letting everybody know, okay, the Big 12 is still one of the best conferences in the country. They're still, and again, right now, the Big 12 is still a really, really, really good basketball conference, and they've been able to stabilize more than, say, the ACC, which ironically is very, very down. Cody, Jeff Capel had a press conference a week and a half ago and literally said, I cannot defend our bad year. The ACC is down, is weak, and I am not going to sit here and argue in favor of the conference just because I'm coaching in this conference. His comments made him personally look ridiculous for how bad their season was, but he made the comments anyway because he knows what's going on. But that was a few years ago. And if you recall, while they didn't really get 14 teams, of course, and get the whole conference in, the Big 12 still got a lot of teams. And the Big 12 had a couple years. Baylor, Kansas, they had back-to-back national championships. In fact, have 2 of the last 4 have the titles before the UConn dynasty. But that doesn't mean the overall conference was performing well in the tournament either, though. Say if you have 8 or 10 teams in and 6 of them go nowhere and lose right away, but you have Kansas who goes ahead and wins the national championship, is that really indicative of your conference being strong, or Kansas and Baylor those years being really, really good? So if Auburn makes a run this year, or Tennessee makes a run, or the SEC does do something this year, that does not necessarily mean they deserve 14 teams. That means that the top 4 or 5 teams in the SEC, they might be the best in the country. But what about teams 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way down to 14? That just seems like a really unfathomable high number that even in the gauntlet of the Big East days, when Huggins won that tournament in the early to mid 2000s, and in that heyday, they made a movie about it, for crying out loud. That Big East conference wouldn't be deserving of 14 teams. I mean, that's just such a high bar. But do you think that, separate from the stupid Tucker DeVries reasoning, to try to get a legit reason here, do you think it was just simply about, we're choosing between North Carolina and West Virginia and we want to get North Carolina in for blue blood? Or do you think they were even trying to help the SEC more, or the ACC and SEC more, and those conferences more, so you get so many SEC teams? Because the other end of this is, you wouldn't have had to choose between North Carolina and West Virginia if you had less SEC teams in. When you have that many teams in, then you're faced with this. What do you think is the real reason, I guess, is the question here, outside of the Tucker reasoning? Because, again, if you look at resume, North Carolina has been playing a little bit better recently. But, Cody, what we need to stop seeing for North Carolina fans as well, the comment of they played really well and close against Duke, but didn't win, versus, like, that doesn't work. If they would have got an upset win or something, then I could see, or they make a run, they're in the championship game in the ACC, maybe then I could see. But hanging close, like, that doesn't get it done. So what do you think the real reason is? Because resumes, again, do not lean North Carolina in any way, and everyone knows it.
Played a Duke team that didn't have Cooper Flag close.
Didn't play Cooper Flag.
Good job on that. It's impossible to ignore Bubba Cunningham's role in this. I mean, it is. In the NCAA put out, North Carolina was the last team in. West Virginia was the first team out. Well, damn, one of those schools' athletic director is the chairman of the selection committee. Right. I guess, let me put my blinders on. I guess that had nothing to do with it. Right? It's impossible to ignore that. So you say, what's the real reason? I have to tell you, the reason in my heart, I believe, is that Bubba Cunningham was the chair of the selection committee.
That can be the answer. Yeah.
It's impossible to ignore that. And we're not going to hear any more about this because the selection committee doesn't care about West Virginia, obviously. I mean, they don't care. They're not going to feel the need to defend one omission, right? They're going to pat themselves on the back when the tournament is awesome like it is every single year. I mean,
we didn't hear much more from the committee in terms of Florida State not getting in the CFP. I mean, you had some media members talking about it, but they didn't continuously bang the drum on that. They just dropped it, and now you hear about it a year later. But yeah.
And in a couple weeks, nobody outside of West Virginia will care anymore. Just like Pitt last year. I mean, Pitt was a massive snub last year,
and nobody outside of Pitt fans are still talking about it.
Yeah, nobody cares. So that's it, and it's Here's the end result. I mean, here's what's going to happen, right? And unfortunately, that UNC first four game, whether it's on True TV or whatever, it's going to get really, really, really good ratings. A lot of people are going to watch that game, right? And it's going to make the network or whatever a lot of money.
And they might even freaking win it because they have a lot of talent on that team that's underachieved this year in terms of what deserving. They haven't deserved it, but they are a good team. So you could even have an example of, and this is what the committee will defend for no end, but Cody, even if this occurs, I will still be comfortable saying what I'm saying now, that West Virginia should have got in, North Carolina did not deserve it. But UNC could end up in the Sweet 16. It's happened before out of Dayton. It's happened continuously. And in fact, Cody, if you recall, to get our history caps on, one of the last examples of a team who's a blue blood coming out of Dayton making a run was UCLA in a very similar scenario. They underachieved with 5 stars. They got in when they did not deserve to be there. And then once they're there, the 5-star kids wake up and say, well, I didn't care about the last 4 months, but I'm really good at basketball, actually. So now I'm going to play some basketball here, and I'm going to win a game. And again, you only need to string across a few games in a row. It's not like it's unheard of where I would be blown off the chair if North Carolina would win a game or two. It wouldn't be insane. We've seen these low seed blue bloods make a run. One of Calipari's final game appearances was, I believe, a 9 seed. Kentucky did this with Calipari. We've seen this even from UConn. Kevin Ollie won the national title when they, again, I believe, were a 9 seed way back, and UCLA having this recent run. We've seen blue bloods who crawl in, even if they don't deserve it, make a run because they have a lot of talent. But what the NCAA tournament is supposed to be doing, they're not doing this. What they're supposed to be doing is taking into account the full season, your resume, which can also include analytics and metrics, because that does tell a story on strength of schedule and what you're really doing and how good you are, what you do, how quality of a team you are, and what you could do, and who deserves to be in based on that. But that's not what they're doing. And the last point I do want to make here on the Tucker DeVries thing, and this is the same thing I said on Florida State, and I do think this is even more an egregious situation than Florida State not getting in. If college sports want to be like pro sports, Cody, it's very weird on certain things they do not do that are similar to pro sports. Something pro sports does very well, in addition to making tons of money, is they create a lot of storylines that then can almost be Disney movies for years and years on end. And one of those even connects to a current pro sports champion. So the Philadelphia Eagles are the current ranked Super Bowl champion. Their first Super Bowl title after the 2017 season, several years ago, was not like this year's team, where it was kind of a dominant run, a historic run for Saquon Barkley and even Hurts being a great quarterback. That was with Nick Foles taking over for then Carson Wentz, who was having an MVP season. He got hurt, and Nick Foles came in as a career backup, had a Cinderella story, and beat a freaking dynasty in arguably the greatest coach and greatest quarterback of all time, and won a championship, the first in franchise history. That title is still in the hearts of some Philadelphia Eagles fans of mine, friends that I know, more than even this recent one. It is going to be talked about. There are movies being made. Nick Foles threw a jab at Tom Brady after the Eagles won this year and said, glad he could be back for another one because he was on commentary. That title is a storybook story. That exact example, Cody, if you move it to the selection committee that are involved right now in the NCAA tournament, based on their exact same mentality, would basically never have existed, because clearly what they would have preferred is to say, okay, Carson Wentz, you're an MVP candidate. You're killing it. They're a really good team. We're in week 11. You got hurt. You're out for the year. Nick Foles is a career backup. We don't think he would do anything. You're not allowed to compete in the playoffs. That would be like what they would do. That would be the comparison. And when I say that and you snicker, doesn't that just sound asinine? Like, it just sounds stupid. If they're ahead in the standings, they're obviously going to get in. You're not going to say that your quarterback's hurt, so now you're banned from getting in. I mean, I can go on and on about this. I mean, the Kurt Warner ended up in the Hall of Fame. He became quarterback because of an injury. Okay? If they would have said, oh, the preseason, Trent Green's out, Kurt Warner, we don't even know who you are. You're bagging groceries last year. We don't want all these movies that are going to be made. We don't want all the money that's going to be made there. We don't want you to end up doing this Hall of Fame story. We're just not going to have you. The Rams don't get to compete this year. They're out. They're playing exhibition games. That sounds insane, but that is very similar to what's going on right now. I mean, that is literally what I would imagine if Cunningham was sitting there in that meeting and they had a selection committee in 2017, that he would have said, no, Wentz is down, so I don't want Nick Foles. That's not entertaining. That's not entertaining for me. I'd rather have the Cowboys because they're blue blood in that division. That's like what he's saying here. That's that's the same comparison. And that's what he's doing now. And that's what happened this year. And it just makes no damn sense.
Yep. It's the player availability stuff. You can't use that as an argument. It's so stupid. And hey, I've been talking about all the
I need any other argument, any other reasoning.
I've been letting Texas off the hook. Texas shouldn't get in either. They stink. Texas and Oklahoma were both 6-12 in the SEC.
Texas is not even a blue blood in basketball. They're not even a blue blood in basketball. This is not football.
Conference is so good that teams that went 6-12 have to get in. And it's like Texas had 19 wins, Oklahoma had 20. What are we doing? No conference on earth is that good. No conference has ever been that good. The teams that win a third of their games get into the national tournament. It's so when I say the SEC doesn't deserve 14 bids, it's unbelievable.
It's not to say they're not the best conference, but 14 is insane.
It's if we want to go back to whatever year it was exactly that the Big 12 was thought of to be so good, I was a big believer that the Big 12 was being overrated, right? Because I think once people get into this mindset of, oh, that conference is so good, look, anybody can beat anybody. That doesn't mean they're good. That means there's parity.
That is what you hear from the Big 12, ACC, all the conferences say that.
That's what happened that year to the Big 12 is they're so good. Anybody can beat anybody. 1-8 it's some of the best teams in the country. And then they go to the tournament and they get embarrassed because, hey, they're not God's conference.
Or even if you have a team go far, because the comeback to that always is, but Kansas won the national title, or but Baylor won the national title, or if you remember Texas Tech, in the final game. So those 3 years, literally those 3 years that we're talking about, which one of them does include Huggins' last tournament appearance with only 19 wins, when everyone was saying going into those seasons, the Big 12 was this dominant conference. It's like the SEC in football. Everybody should get in. All the good teams are there. And I agree, Cody, about 8 or 9 of those teams did not get out of the second weekend, and a lot of them lost in the first weekend. However, they did end up with 2 national champions and Texas Tech getting to the final game. So the Big 12 I'm sure Brett Yormark would come back at you if he was sitting here and saying, okay, but we end up with a national championship. But what I'm arguing is when you have 10 teams in, just for a random number, it doesn't mean all 10 are deserving. Just because one happens to win. So if you have 10 teams and one wins the national championship, do you know what that says to me? That one team was really good.
Yeah.
That doesn't tell me the team 9 was good. That doesn't tell me team 9 is good. That tells me that team 1 is really, really good. Kansas, who is a blue blood, them winning a national championship, which could be done in any conference, they always get recruits, does not mean the conference was really deserving of 10, 11 teams. But it doesn't also mean the Big 12 was not the best at that point. It also does not mean the SEC is a deeper conference than the Big 12 this year. That does not mean they deserve 14 teams. And if you had 12 or 13, you wouldn't even be getting into this mess of West Virginia for North Carolina. What I do want to get to, which will give us time to talk the women's. So Ren Baker released a statement. He went pretty hard, honestly.
Yep.
Darren DeVries released a statement that I've already seen some people think he didn't go as hard, let's just say. Off the 2 statements, what are your thoughts on what Ren Baker had to say, what Darren DeVries had to say? Do you think the criticism of Darren DeVries, because people are already saying it was a weak statement, do you think that's fair? And do you like what Ren Baker had to say?
Yeah. Good for Ren, man, coming out hard. You got to have your coaches back, have your players back, have your programs back. Good for him. I think coaches have to be a lot more reserved when they say, you get someone like Huggins who doesn't care and says whatever he wants. But I do think Darren's
Huggins' statement would have been stronger, 100%.
Huggins would not have made a official statement. He just would have told somebody.
Yeah, right.
Right. We'd get it through Fran.
He would have called in the show. Like Dickie V would be on X right now with like a video show with Huggins is on it. 100%. Yes. That would have been 100%.
But coaches, I think, to a certain degree, have to be more reserved in terms of criticism, because like Darren has to a certain degree be friendly with all the other Big 12 coaches and be friendly with,
what does that
every coach and right.
Yeah,
and so it's so I do think, I do think it's up to the AD to express those. And I'll say, like after the Iowa game last year, Mark Kellogg didn't really say too much about the officiating.
Yeah.
And I heard him say about that. He kind of said, like, everybody else kind of said everything that needed to be said.
Sure.
And I think that's a similar thing here where, like I said, I think it's really hard for a coach to come out and go like really hard and go like semi-scorched earth, because he's got to work in that professional environment with people. And
you could argue so does Ren, though. I mean, Ren has to get in the meetings now. He's going to be he might even get in a future meeting with the North Carolina AD, because who knows what happens in 10 years if he's still at West Virginia and the ACC and Big 12 have to join forces. How awkward would that kind of be where he's mentioning resume by name. He has the graphic up there. The next meeting between the two of them could be a little awkward, but Ren Baker clearly didn't care. Like, he's like, okay, have an awkward meeting. I think I'm right.
Yeah. And that's, I think that shows Ren Baker's a good boss, right? Like, he's the guy at the top of the pyramid, and he's come out and he's had your back. And like I said, he had your players back. He had your programs back. I think that's great for Ren. I think it was a very, very good statement. I thought Darren gave a pretty good statement. And I read Darren's statement. I believe that's what he's genuinely feeling right now. I'm sure he's more sad than angry, right? I'm sure the team is more sad than angry.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about how unexpected this was. Like, this is what these guys work 6 months of the year for, right?
It's why the Tucker excuse is complete bullshit. Because if you're gonna penalize a team and not allow them to play in the postseason because one player gets hurt, yes, Tucker DeVries might be the best player, might be the NBA prospect, might be the most known player going into the season. Him getting hurt, Cody, and the rest of the team still compiling a resume to even be in an argument for this, let alone the fact they should be getting in with the big wins, etc., is more of a testament to them. I think that's where Darren DeVries maybe is getting sad, regardless of his future. I think that's him getting sad because I think he's sitting there saying, I'm sure he had a meeting with his team, Cody, at some point in December, certainly in January and in February once we knew Tucker was out, and he was he wasn't telling the media that much about that, but I imagine he's telling the players more. I'm sure there was a lot of meetings in which he was saying, our guy is down. We got to rally the troops. He was giving that, any given Sunday speech. Let's rally the troops. Let's get in. Let's do it for Tucker. To Tucker's credit, Cody, I bet you Tucker's even upset about this because he was there acting like an extension of the coaching staff. He's screaming more than his dad and most of this. They, as a group, from Darren DeVries to his assistants, to Tucker DeVries, who couldn't play, to Javon Small, who ended up becoming a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate most of the season, and they wouldn't have been in this spot without him. And he had publicly said he hadn't been in an NCAA tournament, and that's what he wanted to accomplish. His career is now over, not getting that done. And everybody else who really stepped up, the Hansburys, the Josephs of the world, everybody else stepping up, because you know why? They believed, apparently to their fault, they shouldn't have, but they believed that when they were told, hey, our guy is down, but we got to rally, and if we rally, we could still get in the NCAA tournament, and that would be what Tucker wants, that's what we want, that's what Javon Small wants. That's a way to rally the troops and respect the situation, and that's their motivating driving force. They even said repeatedly, we want to get in the NCAA tournament. That's why we're doing this. And I wonder if they wish they knew in January, don't kill yourself. There's no chance of it. There's no point in it. Don't kill yourself.
To say to a team, the reason you didn't make the tournament is because a guy that hasn't played for 3 months is hurt.
Right. It's not like he just got hurt.
It's such a slap in the face. To say, really, hey, everything you've done since December 6th,
pointless.
Doesn't matter. Win for the first time ever at Fog Allen. Who cares? beat top 10 Iowa State at home on Jerry West Day.
Right.
I don't give a shit.
What they're saying.
Well,
I know. Yeah.
Hurt.
The Iowa State win we didn't even talk about yet. Yeah.
If Tucker got hurt last month, hey, I might buy that. You could maybe sell that.
Yeah.
To say a guy that played less than 10 games this season is the reason you're not in the tournament. Come on. Do not go on TV and say
it also makes because people will then say, and I can hear this a little bit, that if you were a West Virginia player, and we talked after the Colorado loss and how shocked we were on that loss because they said they were so motivated to win a game there.
Yeah.
There are some now saying that they're hearing the speech argument and okay, they were trying to rally the troops and they're doing the Nick Foles thing. But if that's you, then you need to finish the job by beating Colorado, who's not a good team. They're a very bad team, and they were the worst team in your conference. They should have been able to beat them even if you won by 2 points. You just get that win, and then you're in. But, Cody, based on what the committee chair is saying, who was also the athletic director of the team who got in, the blue blood that got in North Carolina, that isn't true. Because if you now, I think he's bullshitting. But if we're expected to believe what he is saying on national TV as their official statement from the committee chair's mouth, if we're believing what he's saying, he is basically saying you could have beat Colorado by 40, didn't matter. Because Tucker DeVries was known to be out prior to that game, so that wouldn't have mattered. So the argument of they blew it against Colorado doesn't work if you're believing what the committee chairman is saying, if you're hearing that sales pitch for North Carolina, because beating Colorado apparently wouldn't have mattered. That's another reason why that argument is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. And you make a good point, Mike. Like we didn't get this excuse from some guy. We got it from the committee chair on the selection show.
That's an official statement. It's from the committee chair, 100%. Yeah.
It was the first question he was asked. It's the first thing he talked about. And we're beating a dead horse. Of course, it doesn't make sense. But no matter what we say here, it's not going to we're not swinging any opinions or changing any hearts. It doesn't make sense. There's no angle that can make sense. All right, let's talk about the women a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti. I didn't even really basically. Number one, I'm going to semi-apologize here because as someone who professionally has hosted shows and is broadcasting, this has basically just been a rant session. But that is what was really intended to be here. To reset things, though, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, WVU Sports Now. This has been our rant live reaction to West Virginia having the bubble pop, the men's team not getting in the NCAA tournament, and I don't think anything we've said has been different than what could be said or what is factual or what everybody knows, whether you have any West Virginia W connection at all, including national media that are, I'm sure they'd rather have a blue blood in for the ratings and what their contracts could exist. But Cody, we have people that work for Turner, that work for ESPN, that are working for national networks. And again, CBS Turner networks that are going to have these games on that may get more money in their deals because you have blue bloods in and have more ratings, who are publicly saying, here my money, but this doesn't make any damn sense. Like, so when you get to that point, it is so egregious, and this is a problem. It won't matter. I'm sure the committee chair is not listening to this, not listening to anyone's shows, doesn't care what anyone who covers West Virginia or is a fan of the Mountaineers or with the program, doesn't give a damn what they say. When you make a decision like this and you give a reason that's basically some bullshit, you clearly don't care. Like, I'm sure he went to bed, went to his family and told his wife, hey, I screwed the Mountaineers. I'm going to go to sleep tonight. I'm going to sleep soundly. I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to put some North Carolina gear on, and I'm going to be fine. Like, his life will not change in any capacity. So and he's not going to. People say he's not welcome in West Virginia. When is he going to go there? He's not going to be going there. He's not going to ever be going to West Virginia. So there's no time he's going to West Virginia. So he doesn't care. So that is all true. We will give some time now to the women's team that got in. Unlike last year when they had a really unfavorable seed situation and they just got Caitlin Clark handed to them. They had a valiant effort. They even played really well defensively. There was controversy there with the referees, but when you're playing on the road against Caitlin freaking Clark, you weren't going to win, and everyone knew it. Otherwise, that team should have at least been a Sweet 16 team. This team has felt even maybe better than last year's team. This team gets a 6 seed. This team gets more of a favorable situation. This team does now have a path to maybe make that Sweet 16 appearance. That's first for the program since 92. It would be a really, really big deal. This is year 2 of Kellogg and the final chapter for J.J. Quinterly, who I think she's there already. We've talked about this. I think she's there already. If you look at the program history as that Mount Rushmore player, but if she goes ahead and goes to a Sweet 16 when this is a bigger tournament than it was in the early 90s, I mean, she could literally argue as the greatest women's basketball player in program history and not even bat an eye with the argument. So there's a lot in front of them, but they could win. What are your thoughts on the situation for the women, and is there pressure on them? What do you like? What do you don't like about the bracket from what you've seen so far?
Yeah. I think them getting a top 4 seed and hosting was going to be far-fetched, unless they had won the Big 12 tournament. Mark Kellogg said he was very, very happy with the 6th seed. He said that's basically what he thought. And he was very, very happy with their destination. Chapel Hill, of course, we've looked it up. It's about a 6-hour drive from Morgantown. There's a huge alumni base in the Charlotte area that I'm sure will make the trip. I'm sure they're going to get a lot more fans than were in Iowa City last year. Obviously, out in the middle of nowhere. Not to diss on Iowa, it's out in the middle of nowhere.
They know. They know.
It was a much, much harder drive for people here in town. So all of those things are good. And I, like you said, Mike, I think it's a very, very favorable path to make a Sweet 16. I think that has to be the expectation.
That has to be the bar.
Right,
like you get there, the rest is gravy. You get there, the rest is gravy then. Yeah.
Plus they get, the path is even easier. They get to play the play-in team in the first round.
Right.
So Columbia or Washington's going to have just played and going to have a one-day turnaround to prep and prepare for WVU. In WVU style, the full court press. That's really, really, really tough to do a one-day prep on if you're Columbia or Washington, who, hey, if you're them, you don't want to get, you have so many days before that game. You don't want to give any amount of time to West Virginia. You want to focus on, Columbia/Washington, whoever side you are.
Sure.
So that's going to be a really, really favorable first-round matchup. And then you go ahead, Oregon State is supposed to be good. I haven't looked into them too much. The women on the ESPN table on the selection show said Oregon State was pretty good. I will take their word for it. UNC, UNC doesn't have Caitlin Clark, right? UNC doesn't look like a juggernaut. And so it's, like I said, it's a very favorable path to a Sweet 16. And I think we kind of talked about it a few weeks ago, Mike. Like, I think less than that is a little bit of a disappointing season. Not a failure of a season, not an unsuccessful season. I think it's been a very extremely successful season. I do think not making the Sweet 16 right now, I think you could say you're disappointed. And Mike, I think you're right on with JJ Quinterly. I think she's right there. I've tried to look into it more. I will not pretend to be an authority on the history of the women's program, so I won't sit here and tell you what the Mount Rushmore is.
I can give you a couple names, but
I was going to say I assume Rosemary is considered the GOAT. She's the only first-team All-American in program history. I assume Georgianne Wells is up there. I assume Meg Bolger
mention those. I was going to mention Meg Bolger. Another one that maybe is not as popularly talked about is Liz Rapella. I think Liz Rapella could argue as being there too, which is a similar era to Meg Bolger a little bit before. But that's kind of the 4 right now. I would say there's not been that many. This is not like the men's program. So you're looking at those 4. Maybe people could argue some others. I think she has a better resume than some of those we've named so far. So I think I think she could do it.
Oh, hey, there you are.
You still with me? Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, the WVU women, they've had one first-team All-American, like I mentioned.
Right.
Rosemary, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I don't want to butcher it right now. She was a first-team All-American in 1992.
That's the Sweet 16 year, by the way. That's the last Sweet 16 year.
They've had 3 second-team All-Americans. One of them, Liz Rapella. One of them, Bria Holmes. So I think so I think JJ's resume has her right there at the top right now, right? Like 2-time Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, 3-time first-team All Big 12. This is her 3rd tournament appearance.
3 coaches, 3 freaking coaches.
3 coaches. I assume she's going to be at least second-team All-American. I hesitate to say that she's going to be first team just because there's some really, really good women women's players this year.
Yeah.
I could see her getting second team All-American. In already, regardless of her All-American status, regardless of what happens in this tournament, she is right now in rarefied air. She's a WVU Hall of Famer. She's a Legends Society whatever member.
Definitely getting on the Coliseum. Like her definitely pictures getting up there for sure.
She's 100%. Up there. She's I believe she's going to finish top 3 all time in scoring. Like the resume's there. The resume's going to be untouchable regardless of what happens. If she gets first team All-American and takes this team on a Sweet 16 run, I don't know how you argue she's not the best player in program history. I honestly don't. And like you said, I said, I'm not going to pretend to be an authority, but the research I've done and I'll certainly do a whole lot more before, I try to make a claim like this. If these things happen, I don't know how that resume is topped by anyone. Honestly.
Because you have to look at it this way too. Say she does, because anyone who wants to argue first team All-American in Sweet 16 would just equal what happened in 92.
Yeah.
Here's my argument to that. There were literally less teams invited to the tournament in 1992. So getting to the Sweet 16 in 1992 was not as impressive as doing it now. There is more depth in women's college basketball. There are more teams to get in the NCAA tournament. You have to win more games to get there. You have an era with Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Juju, Paige Beckers. You didn't have that many of them back then. You had some. You had the Cheryl Millers of the world. You had some Hall of Famers, but you didn't have as much depth of stars. And the women's game is much more on the forefront of the national conversation than it also was back then. So you could certainly argue, even if they have similar resumes that are matched, even, that this season is still more impressive. And it might not be viewed this way, Cody, but I could make a case now, even if they would get bounced right away, that when you look at totality of her overall career and achievements individually and getting to the NCAA tournament several years in a row with different coaches, this would now be 3 years in a row with 2 different coaches, she could still argue it, even if they don't go to the Sweet 16 this year. But if you get there, I think even if you're second team and you get Sweet 16 when it's a tougher era, a tougher tournament with more teams there, I think it's still her. But I think Mount Rushmore is almost not an argument. Maybe you could argue whether she's the GOAT or not, but Mount Rushmore, there's like 5 or 6 players that you could argue for it, and her resume is better than some of them already. I think she's already there if you're talking about top 4. And that's all in front of her. And she's also played really well down the stretch to get them there. Recently, she's played really well and had some of her best games as a Mountaineer in her entire career. And, I also hope that this, I don't think there's any reason why this shouldn't give her certainly a crack at the WNBA, get her certainly a crack at some pro opportunities. Obviously, who knows what the money will be there. But I think, if she wants to keep playing basketball, I think this certainly could get her that opportunity. What she does in March could be a big part of that for the WNBA draft, for her standing within the program, for the program. And the only thing I'll add here in terms of I do think it's Sweet 16 or bust, I do want to agree if they would lose in the second round, even if they, obviously if they lose the first game to a play-in team, I think that would look really, really bad. But aside from that, it's a successful year. Anytime you win over 20 games for a program that's not really done that many times in a very, very tough conference in only your second year at the job, it is a very, very successful year. So this season already it's quote unquote successful for West Virginia. I don't want to call it a failure if they don't go to the Sweet 16. That's a pretty high bar and you hang a banner for doing so. However, if you don't get there, it is disappointing. And I think it's really, really disappointing for the fact, Cody, and Mark Kellogg's been honest about this. J.J. Quinterly is out of eligibility now. And yes, he's going to recruit. And yes, he has recruited really, really well. And he can recruit again really well based on the success so far in these 2 years. But it's hard to imagine he's going to have a better roster going into the fall than he has right now. In terms of the depth, in terms of Quinterly being there, is he going to recruit in year 1 of a new era without Quinterly, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, or Big 12 Player of the Year candidate, or continuous Big 12 Player of the Week type of player? And you had Maddie Smith even a couple years ago. So they've had that type of player every year during this run, either Don P. or Mark Kellogg for 3 or 4 years now. At the end of Mike Carey, it's hard to imagine next year you're going to have all of that immediately upon Jump Street. So this is the time to seize the day. This is when you grab the bull by the horns. If they don't get a Sweet 16 this year, it's hard to believe it's happening next year. Yeah. So that is the pressure to do it now. If you want it, I mean, hell, we're only 2 years in, and no slight to Mike Carey, because I know he does watch things like this. Maybe he'll come back at us. And he had a long, successful tenure. They were able to win a Big 12. He does have a long, successful career. He's a legit Hall of Famer, and right now is the greatest coach in program history. But if Mark Kellogg gets this Sweet 16 and keeps on building this and sticks around, there's no reason to believe Mark Kellogg does not become the greatest women's basketball coach of all time either. I mean,
so
that's all there too.
I'm glad you brought up Mike Carey. I think I do want to give him some flowers. Something I didn't realize, because women's basketball is just now really hitting this massive popularity. I don't know if people recognized him for what he was doing in West Virginia, and it is kind of shocking when you pull up his stats. He took the Mountaineers to the tournament 9 out of 11 years in a stretch. That's awesome. I think very deservedly Mike Carey.
And stay competitive. Big East to Big 12. Stay competitive.
Home state guy. Awesome for him. I think, you say Mark Kellogg could eventually be the best coach ever.
It's only 2 years in, but it's in front of him.
It's hard in terms of achievements. It's in front of him. Like, you talk about somebody like Kitty Blakemore, who started the women's athletic program at West Virginia. She's unbelievable when you read about her. A free 10 minutes. It's unbelievable how much of her fingerprints are still at WVU. She hired Nikki Izzo Brown, which is mind-blowing to me. Women's soccer head coach. But anyway, one more thing about JJ. I think her legacy is going to be twofold, no matter what happens next week or in 2 weeks or whatever. One, a big part of JJ that I assume is probably going to get lost to history is that is she committed to WVU. Man, does she love it here. Coach that recruited her leaves after freshman year, stays. Coach that replaced him leaves after 1 year, stays. Has a breakout season last year, could have gotten a bag somewhere, could have gone to any team in the country she wanted, stayed to do her senior season at WVU. Doesn't happen in this era. Does not happen in this era. Good for her, good for the Mountaineers. And secondly, for JJ, in a time when women's basketball very, very quickly and very, very suddenly became a star-driven league, she was West Virginia's star. Right? And I don't want to say out of nowhere, but she was, and it's not.
Well, she ascended. She was a role player to become a star. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's not. She doesn't have the Instagram followers of a page.
No, she doesn't have
Buckers or Juju Watkins but on the court, she is a superstar. And like I said, in a period where women's basketball very, very quickly became about, do you have a superstar on your roster? She was West Virginia's superstar. And she stayed here to play her whole career, and they've reached amazing heights with, like you said, 3 coaches in 4 years. And it's very easy to look at the last 4 years, or just say the success of the last 3 years, and say they don't come close to any of this if JJ had at any point decided to jump ship, right? If she's not wholly super committed to this community and the school and her team, none of this happens.
No, they wouldn't be near this if she left. 100%. Yeah. 100%.
I froze again. Anyway.
I hear you still. You still with me? We'll wrap up soon.
JJ's legacy is just, it's secured. It's I hope they go on a great run and she gets all sorts of recognition, because she deserves it, and she's going to be remembered so fondly by fans and by the program. And she's one of these people that you're watching it happen live, and you don't even realize in the moment, historically kind of what it's going to be.
Yeah, and I do think that she still gets a little underrated nationally, because she doesn't have the social media following. She doesn't have the personality. I mean, it almost looks like a little bit like there's a missed gold mine there, because she's not interested in doing any of that. And there's not tons of money in the pro career for for the women. Like the way that Caitlin Clark and they make money is off of NIL and endorsements and even the pro contract. But, she's not able to really become that mega star nationally. Like I wonder even national media that knows about Caitlin Clark and knows about Paige Becker, they might not even know who JJ Quinterly is. And that's a team that is certainly a contender to go to a Sweet 16 at minimum. So that sucks in a way, but that's what her personality is. So you got to, give her respect for sure. If it wasn't for her, as deep as the team is and as good of a coach you could argue as Mark Kellogg is, or even if you want to go Don P and certainly Mike Carey before, this wouldn't be going on without star players in this era of women's basketball. And Maddie Smith was that years ago. And then generally speaking, Cody, a program like West Virginia, certainly on the women's side, if you graduate your superstar, and Maddie Smith could have argued with that then, she's not a Mount Rushmore player, but she was a star then. She was the best player on that team then that went to an NCAA tournament. And then you don't have another one coming in. You're just basically relying on her backup to ascend. That's a pretty risky gamble. I don't think anybody in those rooms, when they were saying, oh, now JJ Quinterly will be who we run the offense through, whether it be Don P or Mark Kellogg, they probably weren't sitting there saying, we're going to go only the second Sweet 16 in program history within 2 years. They probably were saying, we could be good with her. We got to do things with her, but we're not elite because we might take some time to do a quote unquote rebuild. This program never had to rebuild despite coaches leaving because of JJ Quinterly, because she was the one constant. So hopefully she is remembered in that regard. And hopefully, maybe we'll end it here. The only blessing in disguise off of maybe what's fair finally, because if you recall, and longtime fans will, when Mike Carey was accomplishing what you're saying he mostly accomplished from, that 90s run to the end of the 2000s, the Meg Bolgers of the Lizard Pella run, unfortunately, they were doing that during a heyday of the football and men's basketball program. And let's be honest, even the most avid women's basketball fan today was not as into it 20 years ago. They weren't. It wasn't talked about as much. And when the men's team was in a Final Four and then the football team's in a BCS bowl game every year, they weren't putting the women's program was an afterthought, even though they were competing. Now the men's team gets totally effed and definitely deserves to be in the tournament, but they're not there and they're going to wait for the crown or whatever it'll be. So at least for a week or two, certainly when you get March Madness and the NCAA tournament started, maybe the fan base can rally behind the women, and maybe the fan base can say, instead of worrying about what should be claimed from 100 years ago or worrying about what you get snubbed and screwed out of now, if maybe JJ Quinterly will lead the program to a Final Four, be the first Final Four since Huggins will be on the women's side. And maybe they can win a national championship or whatever. Maybe you get it behind that story. And maybe because the men aren't there, it'll give them more people to get behind. Whereas if the men were playing, I think we both know if the men were playing, even though they're probably a one and done team, people will be watching the men more than Quinterly. So maybe she gets a little bit more of the stage now. Maybe that's a little bit fairing it up for the program and even for her staying so long. But not to say that legitimizes anything or justifies anything, because the men should be there. That's just insane. So we will wrap up this live reaction of the show. If you want to hear some more ranting, go back and listen to this some more. This will live on the YouTube channel and maybe on the site in podcast form. Not even sure what we can podcast it, because it really was just us ranting. But nonetheless, more coverage will be at WV Sports now for both the men's snub and whatever the hell, and then the women's team. And they are going to be playing and their ride through March that'll be coming. And hope you enjoyed this rant session because it needed to happen. I think we needed to cathartic too. And I always, my first thing I will say, Cody, and I felt a little bit bad for you as well, because we joked on the last show on how your year, which is well documented, and I'm happy that you're back with us now. This would have been a pain in the butt for sure this year to cover all of this with what's going on in my personal life without you, but didn't want it to happen this way. And, I've covered a lot of NCAA tournaments in my day, both men's and women's. Oddly, in my career, you haven't covered one. Maybe you covered the women's one, but it would have been cool to cover the men for sure.
Yep.
And you kind of got screwed out of it based on the committee chair, really. So it's just something else that did not come up roses for Cody Nespor this year. So I did want to make that happen for you. but it does not. But again, find our coverage at WV Sports Now and continue to rant along in the comments if you want or anywhere else. And happy ranting to Mountaineer Nation.